All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our work session. It is March 24th, and I am going to turn it over to our city manager, DK Wesley.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. We have a bit to go over today, so I'm going to save my comments and let Tony McDowell and Lindsay Spangler go ahead and get started.
All right. Thanks, Ms. Wesley. Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council. Tony McDowell, Finance Director. We are here this afternoon for the second budget work session for the fiscal year 26-27 budget. As Ms. Wesley indicated, we're going to hear from several staff members today. I'm going to kick things off. You're also going to hear from Lindsay Spangler, our budget manager, who's going to cover most of the slides today. And then when we get to the compensation section, you'll hear from Emily Proviance, our HR director, and then not listed on this screen, but we do also have staff from transportation here today as well, who are going to talk to you all about our parking fund and some of the options for fee increases and service expansion for the parking fund. And that will come up after we go through our slides. So our agenda for today for this part of the presentation, I'm going to cover some of the general fund base budget expenses. The first work session we had with you all a couple weeks ago was primarily focused on revenues and fees. So we're going to shift the conversation a little bit today and start talking about expenses. We're going to give you all an update on the budget gap. Lindsay's then going to talk about some of the budget balancing strategies that we've been working on as staff. And then, as I mentioned, Emily's going to cover compensation. Lindsay will come back up and talk a little bit about some new funding requests that we did get from departments this year as well. So again, to start things off, general fund expenses for fiscal year 26-27. So this is for next year budget planning. Staff in the budget office, again this year, instructed departments to keep their base operating budget submittals flat compared to last year, given our budget challenges. But there are some unavoidable cost increases this year. Some of those are inflationary in nature, and we'll go over some of those on the next couple slides. We've already talked to you all in previous work sessions about some of the increases, particularly for healthcare and retirement. And we're seeing some pretty significant increases, particularly in healthcare for fiscal year 27. We've also mentioned before in some previous presentations, and we're going to walk through this third bullet a little bit more in an upcoming slide about the impact of the 2024 GO bond referendum on our budget for next year and what budgeting for that debt service might look like. So when you add up all the things in the base budget and the unavoidable cost increases and the GO bond debt service, we're looking at base budget expenses for next year that are going up at this point by approximately $16.8 million. So this slide highlights those major expenditure drivers. We've shown you all this slide before in some of our presentations. I won't go through all the items in this slide. I will tell you that we've updated a few items on this list since we were last with you all. The first of those that we've updated is the APD staffing. What this item is this is funding to allow APD to move closer to being back to fully staffed. As you all know, they've had a number of vacancies over the last few years, but recruitment efforts have improved, retention has improved, and so their staffing levels have begun to go back up. That's great news. It does mean we have to add more money back to the budget to cover that staffing, and this number that we have for next year is about $1.8 million, which is higher than the number we had in some previous presentations. Those previous presentations, the number really was kind of a placeholder, but we've had a chance to work closely with APD staff, look at their hiring plans for next year, and we've refined that number. And it is up a little bit from previous presentations. On the flip side of that, a number that's come down some since we last talked to you all is the transit contract. We had initially estimated that the increase in the contract might be as much as $3 million next year. The bids have come in, and you all have seen that the increase is actually going to be somewhere only around $800,000 next year. So we've adjusted that number in our forecast. One item that we've added to the slide that we haven't shown before is that fleet maintenance line. That's costs for repairing our existing fleet. We've seen inflation in terms of both the contracts that we use for that as well as the parts and labor as well. One thing we don't have here, and we've mentioned this in some of the check-ins that we've had with you all, is we are monitoring the price of fuel as well. Fuel has certainly gone up. I think everyone's experienced that in the last few weeks. If those prices do stay elevated, we will probably have to come back and add some additional dollars to the budget next year for fuel as well. So as I said earlier, we do want to spend a little bit more time talking about the 2024 GO bonds and how we're going to reflect those in the numbers that you all are going to see today. But first, just as a reminder that Asheville voters approved $80 million in general obligation bonds back in November 2024. Those are for infrastructure improvements to public safety facilities, transportation, parks, and affordable housing. At the time that the referendum was approved, we estimated the annual debt service on those bonds would be about $6.5 million a year. And the ballot referendum that folks voted on included a provision that estimated the debt service on those bonds, and that estimate was that the debt service would require a property tax increase of 2.58 cents once those bonds were approved. As you all are aware, we had initially planned to implement that property tax rate increase during last year's budget process, but once Helene hit and revaluation was delayed, we decided to delay implementation of that tax rate increase for one more year. So in the numbers that we're going to show you all in the next few slides, we've included the full debt service in our expenditure estimates. We've also are showing in our revenue estimates, and I'll show you this slide in a moment too, an offsetting tax rate increase that will cover that full debt service in fiscal year 27. So kind of pulling the numbers all together for general fund expenses for next year, we were seeing that $16.8 million increase that I mentioned. That's the bottom line. Personnel costs are up about $7.4 million. That is mostly the healthcare and retirement increases, as well as the additional dollars we're budgeting in APD. Operating costs, that is primarily the cost for the security contract for the recreation facilities, as well as that fleet maintenance increase that I mentioned. Transfer to other funds includes that funding for the transit, as well as building the housing trust fund back into our budget. And then the last item there is the capital GO bond, $6.5 million that I mentioned. On the revenue side, and we showed you all some revenue projections at your last work session, so we wanted to update those. The numbers in blue are the ones that we have updated since we last talked to you all. We did have a slight change to our property tax estimate based on some updated numbers that we got from the county. That top number does still, at the moment, reflect a revenue neutral approach to property taxes for next year. We'll be coming back to you all probably at your next work session to talk more about what revenue neutral might look like for next year. We have added there on that second line a revenue specifically for property taxes for the GO bonds. And again, that includes the $6.5 million to fully fund debt service, and that would be a 2.58 cent approximately tax rate increase for next year. So we wanted to build that in on the revenue side, as well as build it in on the expense side as well. And then finally, the other number that's changed, you all have on your agenda tonight. It's your formal meeting to vote on fees and charges for fiscal year 27. We have included the additional revenue that would come from those fees and charges if approved tonight. So again, we've adjusted revenue estimates based on those factors. All the other numbers are still the same. So where that leaves us here, so if you look at the column that is FY27 projected, that's kind of our updated gap, and this is before we implement any of the budget balancing strategies or consider any of the budget balancing strategies that Lindsay's going to cover here in a moment. And that gap is $14.2 million. Again, we've changed our presentation a little bit in terms of how we show this, because now we're showing the GO bond debt service revenue on the revenue side of the budget, as well as on the expense side as well. So what we want to kind of leave this section of the presentation, and we're essentially telling a story today with how we present this. I'm going to show you kind of where we're at before we make any kind of budget reductions. Lindsay's going to come up and talk about that. So if we did nothing else, if we stopped here, we would have about a $14.2 million gap between revenues and expenses. And that would, and we've shown this in terms of what that would mean if council were to decide to move ahead and balance the budget purely by using fund balance, which is obviously not what we're going to recommend. But that would bring our fund balance down to approximately 5.9 or 6%.
So I'd asked you this in a meeting before.
Yeah.
What would be the effect of having a fund balance down to 2.1?
Yeah. So we have an internal policy of maintaining a fund balance of approximately 15%, which is generally consistent with most other local governments our size. I think bringing it down that low would certainly endanger our debt rating. We currently have a AAA debt rating, and if that debt rating were lowered, that would just mean higher borrowing costs moving forward for us as we issued, for example, these GO bonds that we're talking about right now. Getting down to that level would most likely trigger some kind of intervention from the state potentially. They typically, they don't have a standard policy. They used to say 8% was kind of the cutoff. They don't have that anymore, but certainly getting down to this level would invite scrutiny from the state for sure. So. Okay, so this kind of brings to end my section of the presentation. So I just would pause here and ask if council has any questions about these initial projections, and then also ask for perhaps some discussion and direction on the GO bond debt service. As I said, in the numbers we've shown you all, we have it fully budgeted on the revenue and expense side. A second option would be to phase in the increase over 2 years and do that tax rate essentially 50% of it in fiscal year 27 and 50% in fiscal year 2028. That would allow us to go ahead and start issuing some of the debt next year, which we will need to do as spending has already started to occur, particularly in the affordable housing piece of the GO bond. So we will certainly need to issue some of that debt next year, and we've talked with our financial advisors, and we could phase in the tax rate increase instead of moving ahead with the 100%. So I'll pause there and see if you all have any questions.
I'm curious if we know if that will impact any of the existing projects or plans in the timeline. Did the Housing Development Department comment?
Yeah, so it's a great question. No, we would be able to move ahead with the projects. It would just delay the actual issuance of the debt, which could potentially on the backside end up with debt costs being higher because we're going to be condensing the period of time for which the tax rate would be there to fund the debt. Plus, there's always risks that the interest rates could go up, they could go down, and so that could impact the amount as well.
If it's functional, I like this idea. I mean, I know it's staving off the inevitable, but just comment that I do like this idea.
Any other questions on this section? If not, I will turn it over to Lindsay, and we can certainly come back and revisit any of this later in the presentation as well. Thank you all.
All right, hello everyone, Lindsay Spangler, Budget and Performance Manager. So as Tony mentioned, I will start our conversation about budget balancing strategies. So we have developed an initial list of general fund cost savings for next year. We will take a look at some examples of what that looks like. And what's included in this list is eliminating some vacant positions. Also, we have a list of some potential service reductions that we'll discuss today. And altogether, if you look at all the savings, you get just shy of $7 million in strategies. And here is kind of a categorization of what that looks like. So we have about $1 million from efficiencies, and on the next few slides, I'll go through what each of these categories is made up of. Kind of the two other biggest ones here are service reductions and also transfer to other funds. And again, we'll go through these in a little bit more detail on the next slides. So for efficiencies, that's about $1 million, as I mentioned, and that's mostly made up of just a lot of little things mixed together. So it's reductions to training, supplies, software, contracted services, a few others as well. Then there are some vacancies that we are recommending either taking down or repurposing or reallocating to areas where we think there's a need. So the way we went about finding these vacancies are, the first step was obviously to check with departments and see what their levels of vacancies were and see if there was any room, just having conversations with them. And then after that step, we also took a look at all vacancies throughout the city that have been vacant for over 250 days, either because the position is hard to fill or because of the ongoing hiring freeze. And so we chatted with departments about how the work has been absorbed since that position's been vacant, and checked with them to see if those positions could be taken down. Program pause, so this is taking down for next year the contribution to the Housing Trust Fund. We also did that in this year's budget, so we just continue that into next year. There's also a few areas where we have a budget that doesn't quite match the amount of spending in certain program areas. So neighborhood matching grants is an example of that, where we typically don't spend the whole amount we allocate for that program every year. So we would reduce the budget to match historical spend. And pool maintenance is, of course, another area where we can at least short-term take some savings. Employee benefits, there's 2 items in this category. The first is pausing the Quality of Service Award Program. That's a small pot of money we set aside to award employees who do work that's above and beyond their normal duties. We're pausing that program for the remainder of this year and next year so that we can kind of revamp the program and make some changes to the way that funding is allocated for that. And secondly, the city has a 401k program for employees, and in 2024, we added a 1% match to that 401k. So this savings would eliminate just the 1% matching. Employees would still receive the 5% as part of their 401k. And lastly, transfer to other funds. These are both one-time strategies. So we would pause transfers to HERA's operating fund and the transit fund. The general fund typically transfers some general fund dollars into those funds so that they can make their operating budgets whole. But this year, there is some additional fund balance in both of those enterprise funds that we can use to cover the gap on their operating budgets. So again, since fund balance is a one-time revenue source, this would be a one-time solution. So now we're going to go into a little bit more granular detail about some of the service reductions we're proposing. So the first would be a reduction to community center hours. So directly after COVID, there was a large increase in community center hours. So this cut would bring some hours at community centers back to pre-COVID levels. Summer hours would remain the same, but off-season hours would decrease by about 13%. And the Parks Department has done a lot of work to kind of figure out where cuts to hours can be made with the least impact to residents in the community. Next is a public art contribution and maintenance. So every year we set aside about 1% of our long-term debt in our capital plan for public art. So this cut reflects that we would not contribute into that fund next year. So the money that already exists in that fund would still be there, but we wouldn't contribute the 1% of our CIP for next year. And this would also delay a few maintenance projects that were planned for next year. Reduction of the security contract. So this would be a change in the security at a few community centers based on where there are some centers that have lower incident levels. And the last one on this page is reducing median and guardrail maintenance. So this would eliminate a couple contracts that do mowing and near guardrails and medians and some other maintenance work. Here's a second slide of service reductions. So the top one would eliminate financial support for holiday events, meaning that some organizations that put together those events would need to find additional funds within their budgets to cover the revenue, the cash that they receive from the city. We're also looking at reducing our litter and hotspot cleaning contract. So right now, this cleans about 40 miles per week of roads, and this would decrease the contract to 30 miles a week. And lastly, we would recommend pausing the AVL Arts Grant Program. So organizations get some funding from the city to use towards city's fees and charges, and so this would pause that program. All right. So if y'all remember, Tony showed you the slide that showed our gap. So here is an update. If we were to take all of the savings that we just discussed in the previous slides, our gap would decrease from 14 million to about 7 million. Obviously not zero, but it brings them closer together. So that's good. All right, any questions? The next section will be to discuss compensation, so I'll pause here for questions.
I have a question. One of the items presented was kind of closing the gap on positions that have been vacant for 250 or more days. And then another part of the equation is reducing hours at community centers. Is that going to mean losing jobs? Or is it connected to the previous conversation about reducing staff capacity?
So the eliminating vacancies is vacancies, so there's no filled positions that we'd be taking down. For the community center hours, all that is work done by temp seasonal employees, so it would be reduction in hours, but it wouldn't be necessarily eliminating positions.
We just wouldn't be hiring people in temp positions that we normally do.
Exactly.
Interesting, thank you.
Well, or current temp seasonal employees might see a reduction in hours, I think, because we ramp up for summer, we have temp seasonal in summer, but don't we have some that are categorized as temp seasonal? For example, we're all categorized as temp seasonal. So don't we have folks that are categorized as temp seasonal that may be employed right now that could see a reduction in hours if we did this?
Yeah, yes.
Lindsay, I had requested if the number would change if we looked at 180 days instead of 250. Did we do that
Yes.
analysis?
Yes, Councilmember Turner, and we did look into that, actually. We did the analysis with 180 days, and we actually didn't find any that
Okay.
fit in that category. So there's some that have been vacant for a long time, like over 250 days, and then there's some that have been vacant for a shorter period, but nothing kind of
Okay.
fell in that area.
Thanks.
I have a question around the suggestion of reducing community center hours to pre-COVID levels. And that you're suggesting summer hours remain the same and then off-season hours would decrease by 13%. Is that across the board or is that based on community center? I just have a real curiosity because community centers are in very different neighborhoods and have different usage. And I just don't get a sense of like, I don't know, maybe is one really, really busy all the time and one not? And should we look at it that way as opposed to across the board? So kind of utilization and usage, I just would love some more perspective.
Yes, indeed. I think the short answer is there was a lot of work put into the numbers, and I'm going to turn it over to Dee Tyrell, the Parks Director, to speak more about that.
Thanks, Steve.
Good afternoon, Council, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council, Councilwoman Ullman. It varies. We did, part of the process of looking at reducing hours included several things. As Lindsay mentioned, part of that is reducing hours during the school year. So we would keep the hours during the summer the same. You wouldn't see a reduction during the months of June, July, August. But during September through May, we look at reducing hours. Right now, what we presented is reducing hours up to like an hour per center per day is kind of what that reduction looks like. And each center is a little different, so it varies. What we have done in proposing this, however, is looking at the programming that is currently happening at centers, understanding what the data looks like, when are the centers most populated, when are they least populated, looking at when we can reduce hours either in the morning or at closure, and that's all based on the types of centers. We know our gym sites are heavily populated with programming and participants in the late afternoon, evening hours. Senior sites are opposite. more participation in the morning, early afternoons. So what's being proposed at a senior site looks a little bit different than what's being proposed at a gym site. But it's all based on attendance and the number of people we're serving at various times.
That's very helpful. I'm just not surprised at the layers and levels of analysis. I just wanted to understand more on that question. Thank you.
Cool.
I also had questions on the reducing median guardrail maintenance as well as the litter and hotspot cleaning contracts. So are both of those functions contracts or, okay, so those are outside folks?
Yes.
And so it just would be, we would have a smaller contract to do less cleaning, less frequent and less,
So the hotspot litter cleanup would be a reduction of the contract, and the median and guardrail maintenance would be eliminating those contracts that handle that.
But I think my previous understanding of this is that it's not that the work would never be done, it's reducing the frequency. I'm seeing some nodding behind you, so maybe it's a little more.
Good afternoon, Amy Deaton, Public Works Director. Regarding the median, so there's 3 contracts in that. There's the median maintenance, mowing contract, and the guardrail weed eating, that's hard to say, contract. So those contracts would be, we would not have the contract work. We would try to do that in-house, but it would be reduced, either reduced cycles or reduced areas. So by reduced areas, we would focus on site triangles, so like pulling it at an intersection. To be able to see to pull out, we would concentrate on those areas so that people could see to pull out. So we would do that in-house with reduced areas, or we have also discussed partnering with another department to try to join forces and do more work.
thank you.
That's helpful explanation, thanks. Did you have another question? Because I just wanted to.
Go for it.
Okay.
About security?
No, my question was about the art fund. In a previous conversation, I had an understanding that we might have some balance already in that fund. Do you know how much we have already in that fund?
The Public Art Fund,
Yeah,
yeah, we have about $250,000 in that fund right now.
okay, and so the proposal here is to pause funding it for this year, but there is funding in the fund now. You mentioned that there might be some delays of some work. Would the funds that we have available in the fund be able to be utilized? I guess I'm trying to understand why there would need to be a delay if we have some funds already available for use. Unless
Yeah.
maybe they're already promised to some, maybe they're committed to something.
They are, yes. The funding that's already in there, I think, has been planned out for specific art projects. The work that would be delayed is specifically for maintenance, so it's outside of the capital world. It's just like doing maintenance on
Oh, I see. Not
public
new
art.
construction of art, but
Right.
maintenance of existing art pieces. Okay,
Exactly.
I understand.
All right, thank you. I will move on unless there's any further questions. Okay, I'm going to start the conversation about compensation, and then I will turn it over to Emily. It's just a little bit of history on compensation. So as everyone knows, personnel is a large part of our general fund and our total budget. It's about 64%, and we did do a little benchmarking this year. This is pretty typical. About state and local governments across the U.S. spend about 63.94% of their budget on personnel, so we're just about exactly the average. And here's the history of what we've invested in compensation and benefits over the past 6 or so years. So right during COVID and that crisis, there was a lot of uncertainty about budgets, so we didn't provide an increase that year, but since then there's been increases to our compensation packages and our benefits that you see here. And this chart shows what that means for employees and what they get in their paychecks. So again, in '21, there was not an increase for employees, but since then, there's been increases every year. In FY22, there's an implementation of a study, a market rate study that we did. So everyone got either a minimum of 2.5% or whatever the study said would get somebody to a market rate. And then in the past few years, we've gone everywhere from 3 to 5% with some additional compensation adjustments for fire and police. And just a reminder of what we did for this year's budget that we're currently in. So everyone who's on the general pay plan got a 3% hybrid increase. So what this means is if your salary was above the median salary of $58,000, you got a 3% increase to your base salary. And if you fell below the median salary, you got a flat increase to your salary of $1,740. And so that was meant to kind of bring everyone at the bottom of the pay scales a little bit higher up than people at the top. Folks on the police pay plan were moved to a different pay structure, and so there were some compression adjustments made as part of that process, but everyone received at least a minimum of 3% increase, if not more, based on where they fell with the compression. And those on the fire pay plan also received a 3% increase. And last year, we did not recommend changing the pay grades, so those stayed the same. And overall, that added about $3.7 million to our personnel costs. All right, now I will turn it over to Emily Provence to continue the discussion.
Good afternoon. Emily Provence, Director of Human Resources. As Lindsay stated, I will be presenting 4 different scenarios for your review related to employee compensation increases for next fiscal year. As we developed these strategies, we considered a lot of factors. The 4 main were accelerating progress towards a living wage for full-time staff. Local calculations from Just Economics estimate that our living wage is now $50,128 annually. We also want to manage our pay scales to minimize salary compression. It was important for us to base recommendations on quantifiable benchmarks. The Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that state and local government employees will average a 3.3% increase this year, and so that is the benchmark that we used. That represents about $3 million in our general fund. Finally, important to develop a multi-year plan to resolve some of our systemic compensation issues and transition towards performance-based pay. The structural issues that our compensation structure currently has is that our market, our current pay lags the market. It lags inflation, which means that our employees lose purchasing power, and unfortunately, we lose talent sometimes. Relying on across-the-board increases exclusively can cause salaries to cluster along a horizontal line instead of move in the upward curve that you would like to see. Increasing pay grades at the same rate as annual raises tends to compound these structural flaws, and it prevents us from catching up with the market. And finally, to remain competitive, we often have to start new hires at or above existing staff salaries, which, as you can imagine, can cause some friction and morale issues. So moving into the scenarios, the first is to use that 3.3% exactly that way, 3.3% across the board for every full-time employee in the city. It's a simple approach. It raises the minimum salary to $41,692, and it gives every full-time employee a clear, easy-to-understand increase. This is pretty low maintenance, and it won't add to existing compression. And while it does move us towards the market rates, it's not going to have a lot of impact on our hard-to-fill roles won't close the gap with some of our competing employers locally or reward top performers. The second scenario, we would use the same $3 million in our general fund to distribute dollars equally to all permanent employees. We estimate that the dollar increase would be $2,244 for every full-time employee. Again, this is very simple, and it prioritizes raising our lowest paid staff while ensuring that all employees receive an increase. Our lowest salary would then move up to $42,604. This could help with recruitment for our entry-level roles. Again, it's easy to communicate, but it isn't performance-based, and it's not gonna close the gap with our market competitiveness more than the first scenario. Scenario 3, we would conduct a salary survey early in fiscal year 27, and then we would hold the $3 million until January, at which point we would allocate it to address the most significant pay disparities. The really big advantage to this approach is that we would have real current data to make compensation decisions with. Important to note that the $3 million will not be enough to fully implement the study's recommendations. And so while it would represent a permanent increase to our budget, it's very probable that all employees would not receive an increase. For that reason, internal communication would be important to ensure transparency and understanding. The fourth scenario is actually a hybrid of scenario 1 and 3. And so this option would give staff a 2.5% increase in July and then set aside almost $750,000 to begin addressing the critical market disparities that the study shows us. It's a simple approach that provides a raise to every full-time employee. It's low maintenance in that the 2.5% won't add to existing compression. It does have the advantage that it would allow us to make data-driven decisions with that discretionary $750,000. However, it still doesn't address performance. So at this point, I'll pause and see if you have questions, preferences between scenarios, other scenarios you'd like us to consider. I do want to say that if the decision is made to increase compensation, HR would recommend increasing our pay grades by 1.5% at the minimum and the maximum levels for all pay grades.
So in my budget check-in, I thought we only looked at 3 scenarios. So scenario 4 looks like a mix of scenarios 1 and 3.
Correct.
And maybe it's the way it was presented, but I heard you say if we went with scenario, 3, all employees might not receive a raise. I think it might have been meant not all employees would receive a raise. It's not a scenario where no employees would receive a raise, but that some might not. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to be clear. Also in the check-in with scenario 2, there's a little bit of a story about how staff landed with this one.
Yes.
With the flat amount, that you had done some work that we had asked about in the past, and I want to give you credit for doing that, but can you explain a little bit of that wrestling match with the math and the communication issues?
Certainly. So, yes, Council Member Roney points out that we did start scenario 2 by developing a graduated formula that would provide larger increases to our lowest paid staff and lower increases to our highest paid staff. And we started with that $3 million. And when we applied that to the formula, what we found was that our lowest paid folks, some of them would earn a 4.5% increase. Moving up to the high end of our pay grades, some people would get about 0.5% increase. And as we were doing that math and looking at the number, what we realized is $3 million isn't a large enough number to spread that money across those ranges. And so everybody's increase was within a very narrow dollar amount. And as we started to think about how we would have to communicate those differences, so for example, if a laborer in Public Works got a 1.8% increase, but a laborer in Parks got a 1.9, how would we explain that difference? We got to the point with budget where we decided that doing a flat rate, which was basically a median of that very small range, might make more sense and be easier for us to communicate to our employees, while also achieving a higher percentage increase, right? So the 2244 is a bigger percentage of my salary if I make $45,000 than it is if I make $100,000. So you're still achieving that graduated percentage increase across your employee base. It's just a lot easier to explain.
Thank you so much for putting that conversation into this public space, because we've been having this conversation for years, and staff put in a lot of time and effort and intention around it, and I wanted y'all to get credit for doing that work. The slide that's missing is the one that kind of shows the side-by-side comparison.
So we took the slide out once we had 4 scenarios because the only 2 that we have definitive numbers on are 1 and 2. So we can tell you what our lowest salary would increase to if we added 3.3%. And we can tell you what it would be if we added the flat dollar amount. What we can't project without the salary study data is what those salaries would be based on the market.
But we do have an idea from 1 and 2, how many positions get brought to the living wage.
We do,
Okay.
yes. And I don't want to be quoted on this, but I do believe that option 1 would bring our number of people under the living wage down by 8. And I think that option 2 would actually bring our number of employees under the living wage down by close to 100.
And so for anyone who's really confused about the living wage calculation, that's, the math is held in the work with the community partner, Just Economics. It's $24.10 an hour based on 40-hour weeks for 52 weeks a year, which lands at that number you presented today at $50,128 starting salary. Just a note, as always, that we have employees, especially in the fire department, that are scheduled more than 50 hours a week. So we have differentials in our own scheduling. But this is very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
On the option 4, if you go back, so it kind of feels to me like, I don't know if there's a recommendation. Were you gonna, was I interrupting your last slide?
Not at all.
Okay. I know we've had this conversation around the need to adjust salaries across the city to make them competitive within and without, and for a variety of reasons. And that's typical of cities, that they would do some type of study and see how competitive they are compared to similar sized cities, and then make adjustments. And we actually did that. It's been a few years now since we did our last one. I don't know what a healthy interval is for doing that, but it sounds like we're due.
We are. It's 3 to 5 years, and it's been longer than 5 years since the Archer study.
So, and you know, we've been able to, since COVID, not during COVID, but since COVID, been able to do pretty reasonable pay increases. But obviously, we're having a year where we're having to look really closely at this. So I like the idea that we're able to address, do a study and be able to address some of those issues, and that this hybrid presents that opportunity. I mean, I understand whichever scenario we select, we're looking at, in all likelihood, a property tax increase to pay for it in terms of the funding of it. I mean, I guess I'd look to the manager and ask, I mean, in terms of what you're trying to do with the city staff and address pay issues, do you have a preference as to, between you and Emily, which one of these makes the most sense from a management standpoint?
Yeah, we've had that discussion, so Emily's prepared to share a recommendation.
Okay.
So we would recommend scenario 4, and the reason we would recommend it is it does allow every full-time permanent employee to get an increase. We are concerned with scenario 3, as Councilmember Roney pointed out that there would be employees who would not get an increase. This hybrid scenario allows everyone to get an increase, but it also gives us a significant chunk of money that we can actually address the disparities with data. Until we have that market study, I feel like we're working under our best assumptions, and that market study is going to give us actual data that we can move forward with. And so, in that sense, I think that this is the best of both worlds.
I feel like scenario. Thank you for that. Scenario 4 with the 2.5% across the board addresses some of the concerns you all have on those higher paying competitive positions. But in the past couple of years, council has landed in a place where we like to see a flat rate because it brings up folks who are paid less, more percentage-wise. It is, I guess I'm kind of wondering if there's a way to do number 2 along with a study and what that what that looks like. I will say this, I'm very differential to the manager when it comes to pay and employees and how that structurally works. Our role as council, I want to be very supportive of the staff and supporting a pay raise for staff. Now, how that's done is very much a manager decision. So I'm trying to stay in my lane, but I just, knowing that we're not able to pay everyone a living wage and knowing that our lower paid employees are the ones struggling and trying to address that is definitely a value of the council's and something that if we were to move on this, I think would be of interest. So
we could certainly get those calculations for you. We could let you know what it would mean to keep the $750,000 for January, but also give everyone a flat dollar.
And it would be helpful to know how many employees would remain below the living wage and how many above, and how many are full-time employees versus temp seasonal categories. To me, that's helpful information now.
I have a question on slide 32. You said HR recommends increasing pay grade ranges by 1.5%?
Correct.
But then you were just saying you recommend scenario 4. So what you're saying is in scenario 4, there's a pay increase. Last year, we didn't necessarily change pay ranges. And so you're saying if we do an increase, make sure that ranges change, because that was a
correct
inconsistency in understanding from last time?
Yes.
Okay.
A healthy rhythm of, so your pay grades, the actual structure is separate from people's pay.
Got it.
Right? People's pay lands along the pay structure. This would be an increase to the structure. And so every pay grade would move up 1.5%.
So now we're looking at scenario 5, which is scenario 2 plus 3.
2 plus 4.
2 plus 4. Okay.
That Mayor just detailed. Yes, we can look at that. Any other questions? Okay, I think I am handing it back over.
Well, maybe we're going to get to it. It's okay. Go ahead.
Okay.
Before we move to new funding requests, I just want to clarify on the compensation scenarios. Any scenario that we bring forward will be at the same funding amount. So it would be $3 million in the budget. And we can look at, we've probably looked at several, 6 or 7 different ways to split this. But what we'll bring back what was requested, but we'll also bring back, from our perspective, what will ensure that we maintain a healthy compensation and classification structure going forward.
I'm just a little bit confused because you said after the decision is made, using the $3 million, you would apply the 1.5 to the pay range. That's not inclusive of the $3 million?
So that won't be applied to people's pay, that will be just the structure, so
Okay.
she could clarify that.
So basically what it would do is it would raise our minimum hourly rate by 1.5%, and then every rate above that would go up 1.5%, the maximum and the minimum. Whereas the 2.5% would be applied to people, to what they're actually making.
So when new people get hired into said position, like a
It-
firefighter, they would be starting at 1.5, but they wouldn't. They-
Above
they-
last year's, yes.
We messed this up last time. There was some confusion, maybe. We didn't quite understand that we weren't raising the floor, which is what we're doing in this particular comment.
It's what we would recommend if an increase is approved, correct?
I'll go ahead and ask my question because it might come up. I'm sorry, Tony, but so we're talking about $3 million. The value of a 1 penny increase in our new tax value world, do we know it yet?
So Tony McDowell, Finance Director. So we don't. We've gotten some initial estimates from the county, but we're going to bring that information to you all at your April 14th work session. As part of last year's budget process, just to give you some context, it was about $2 million for 1 penny. So obviously with a reval, that is going to go up somewhat from there. So, but we'll have more definitive numbers next time.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that, because I know there's a slide where you're kind of asking for our direction, but it's out of the context of what's the cost to the public, and so it's a little hard for me without that to sense, I'd be curious. I mean, I guess you're showing us 3%, no, you're showing us 3 million. And once we see the context of what the cost is to the public, we could scale that number up or down.
Possibly, what we'll do is, we wanted to kind of get your thoughts on the different scenarios, because we know that there's been policy direction to do some things differently previously, so just wanted to get some feedback on that. What my intention is to bring back a recommendation that includes a compensation increase, and of course, you all can determine if you want to look at different levels for that.
Yeah, I guess part of me, cart before the horse, or chicken and egg, really, is kind of, in my mind, I'm kind of really, like, I just got my tax revaluation in the mail yesterday. I've been waiting and waiting, and it's 86%, like many others. And so as I'm reviewing all these options for how to care for our employees, it just, the whole picture really matters when I'm making this analysis. And I've had people ask, is this a year for a raise? I personally decreased my salary in my business this year because I needed to. And so I'm not saying we do that here. I'm just, it's hard for me to understand, or I'm eager to see those other numbers to understand, is compensation at this level, what's the impact on the public going to be?
I think it's a fair point, Councilwoman Allman, and I share that concern. And, it's hard for me to jump, like this next slide says new funding request, and this was an increase in wages right after what I would say is somewhat of a slaughtering of community services. So I'm seeing like the impact overall is just really challenging until I understand really what it means for the taxpayer.
I think you just gave every journalist their favorite line to use. I would hope that, these are cuts, but this is a overall budget that's $260 million, give or take, so.
And it's still a discussion, right? We're just saying, what we did, I know what I did was ask staff to say, what could we cut? Where can you trim? And this is the response, and I didn't expect it to be anything less than painful.
Okay, I'll turn it back over to Lindsay. Thank you very much.
All right. New funding requests. Just a few slides, just a few.
To set the stage for this, you
Sorry.
are presenting this to us for information.
Yeah.
This is not
Yes.
some kind of bizarre exercise where we look at cuts and then we suddenly look at
Yeah.
adding spending. There's a point to going through this exercise.
Yes, thank you. We are not recommending a bunch of new funding requests here. It's important for the health of the organization to go through the process of looking at what are the needs across departments every so often. We did not do that process last year. After Helene, we asked departments not to submit any funding requests. And so we did ask departments for funding requests this year because we do think it's important to go through that exercise, know if there's something time sensitive happening that we need to be aware of, and try as much as possible to fit things into our current budget as well. So we did receive about $7.5 million of new funding requests from departments, which included about 38 positions. Two that we just wanted to pull out for this group is 2 positions related to GO bonds. So when the bonds were approved by the voters, we did indicate at the time that there would be some need for folks to manage those projects. It's a big lift on the project manager side. So obviously we did not approve those positions after Helene, since we didn't do the debt service. We've delayed that. So we would recommend this year, if we do go ahead and increase the tax rate for the GO bonds, that we also include a bit more funding for these 2 positions that will be really key to getting those projects done efficiently and on time. So one is an affordable housing bond manager, and the other is a capital program manager for public works. And so this would be funded by a tax rate increase that's tied to the GO bond.
Quick question, is that changed at all if we move to the delayed half implementation?
We could still add these, yeah.
It's not like 2 positions, it's, okay. We'd still need both.
Yeah, there's ongoing work in all these areas that could really benefit from additional folks there. All right, and we also wanted to speak about the 4th shifts, since that was a big undertaking from last year's budget process. And if you remember at the time, the department presented kind of a long-term plan for adding positions, firefighter positions to the budget in order to allow overtime for firefighter hours to come down to a level that was more closely aligned with other city employees. So kind of the recommendation that we've heard is that if you add 16 firefighters, which would cost about $1.4 million next year, that is where you kind of get the most change. So you would see a reduction in hours go from 52.6, which is what it is currently, to 50 hours. And it would also help a lot with the shifts, like scheduling shifts and all that complicated business. So that would cost about $1.4 million. So just presenting that to this group as an awareness. And that's all for new funding requests. Just a quick reminder of what we have coming up. So on our April 14th work session, we'll be talking about enterprise funds and the business improvement district. We'll also be talking CIP. We'll bring some folks from our capital management department to talk about that. And as Tony mentioned, we'll also have some more information by that point on the reval and the property tax rate and what that might mean. And we'll do anything else outstanding at that point before the proposed budget comes on May 8th. Here's the rest of the schedule here. So tonight we have our work session right now, and then later tonight we'll be voting on the fees and charges manual. One more work session, then we'll propose the budget in May, have a public hearing, and adopt the budget in June.
Is there a way, or maybe I just missed it, is there a way to determine the difference between the cost of adding 16 firefighter positions and the cost of overtime were they not added?
So that is a good question. So we've talked about this a little bit internally, and I think where we are is if there was a change in overtime, it would be short term and it would be difficult to calculate before it's implemented. So you're right that if we did have more firefighters than we needed we had more availability of firefighters, it could potentially bring down overtime, but it would only be short term, because once you start to decrease the number of hours that folks need to work, then you start to decrease the effect on overtime. So it's a yes, but not something that we necessarily feel comfortable taking down budget for, because it's not gonna, we're not sure how much of a decrease it could be, potentially no decrease.
Okay, thank you.
I have another AFD pay and 16 positions question. And I should have done more due diligence on my own, so I apologize. I do see a fire representative in the audience here. When I was going through this with us last year around this 4th shift, maybe I'm remembering incorrectly, but I thought there was a way that it was going to be like 4 and 6 shifts, but now it's 14 or 16, no matter what, just to start. Is there a way to scale it back at all, or this is just, it has to be 16?
Good afternoon, Council. Mike Case here, the Asheville Fire Chief. The 16 is where we can actually make an impact on their schedule. Anything less than that does the immediate impact is a lessening of the overtime that we have to pay out to keep that schedule. So you saw on the slide, they're currently working 56 hours a week.
Yeah.
On August 1st, when we implement the 4th shift, they will go down to 52.6 hours per week. Adding 16 people allows us to do by adding another debit group. Don't worry about what that means. But basically, what that allows us to do is to then reduce their hours to 50 hours a week. But it takes about 16 people for each debit group to get added, which is what decreases their hours per week that they work.
I remember thinking it was really complicated, so,
It's so complicated. But yes, it works out actually.
all right, thank you.
Mhm.
And just to add to that, yes, the proposal that was given to us at the time was, I think, a 5-year plan, and it had about like 15 or so each year, but there wasn't it could be phased in however many years you want
Okay,
to get to the total amount that you need.
thanks.
All right, so I'm done with my portion of the presentation, and I think right now I'll turn it to you, or I'll turn it over to City Manager.
So if no more questions on that, as the mayor mentioned, it's a process, right? So we're bringing you all pieces of the puzzle. On the April 14th work session, we expect to give you a fuller picture to really help you all get started giving us more guidance in building of the budget, the proposed budget. So it's really important that we take you through the story and the steps that it takes to build the budget, but we understand that it's difficult to give real concrete guidance before you have the full picture. So we'll make sure you have that on the 14th. At the last work session, you all heard about our proposed fees and charges across the organization. One piece that we did not include was parking. And so our transportation and parking staff is here, because they're the experts in this space, to give you all an update on where we are, kind of share some of the science around parking services management, and provide a recommendation for FY2027.
Good afternoon, Jessica Morris, Assistant Director of Transportation. Sabrina Talley is our Parking Services Division Manager. She couldn't be here this afternoon, but she helped prepare this presentation today. So our key takeaways are that there is a lot more to parking than just parking cars. I just want to put that out there. And we don't just charge fees to make money. That's actually not really the purpose of what we're trying to do. We're trying to manage what we consider to be a very valuable public resource for the community, so that people can use that resource and so that it's available to the public that needs to use it. It should be managed as a system, so looking at the on-street and the off-street assets that we have, and so that we look at the rates, how the assets are operated, what policies we have, and try to look at all those holistically. So what we have today for FY27 changes have been proposed with a methodology that is looking at data and best practices, in addition to revenue opportunities as well. So the rates for garages, lots, and permits, as well as on-street metered parking, are interconnected, and they should be looked at as a system. So on-street metered parking are meant to be used for convenience, and so the rates should be set so that they are the highest hourly and daily rates, and they should have time limits so that we are encouraging those spots to turn over. Garages, the hourly rates for garages should be lower than what you see at your on-street meters, because you want to try and push folks that have the intention to stay longer, you want to push them to park in a garage. So the garage rates should be lower than what you see at your on-street meters. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to shift demand from one place to another where you have underutilized facilities. And we want to do that so that we're optimizing our very valuable public parking resources. So we look at our occupancy data in our garages in particular, and we try to aim for an 80 to 85% occupancy. And this is considered to be optimal in the parking industry because it's kind of that sweet spot where you're getting a high level of utilization, but it's not so high that people come in, can't find a spot, they get frustrated, and they leave. Same for on-street parking as well. You don't want people to have to just circle, circle, circle and never find a parking spot. So you really want to have your rates and your time limits kind of dialed in so that you're getting that sweet spot of turnover where people are able to find a parking space and they're able to get to where they need to be in a convenient manner. So one of the issues that we have is in our garages, some of them have a really high waiting list. And so that's something that we're trying to influence here with our pricing structure, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So what we're trying to do is balance demand. So we want to use rates to balance our demand. And so sometimes reducing rates at underutilized locations may shift demand to another lower utilized location. And sometimes we want to raise rates to reduce the demand at a place where we have way too much. So changes may seek to encourage shifting from hourly parking to monthly or vice versa. So it can be complex is what I'm trying to say, and we're trying to use best practices between our rates and all of our different factors to try to shift people from one location that might be underutilized from a location that we might have way too much demand. So what we have proposed for FY27, we have specific goals that we're trying to achieve. One of them is that we'd like to improve the on-street availability during our peak evening demand hours, so between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. We want to reduce and shift demand for monthly parking permits at Rankin Garage, Wall Street Garage, and Biltmore Garage. And the reason that we want to do that is we want to improve the availability of the permits there because we have very significant wait lists for those permits. We do not have that problem at the Harris Garage. We have a lot of capacity there, so we want to try to reduce the wait list there, shift some demand to Harris Garage. We also want to expand our parking coverage into the South Slope. And I know that's something that you guys have interest in talking about, so we'll talk more about that. We want to increase, one of the benefits about revenue generation is that we can invest that into capital maintenance of our facilities. And we do want to talk to you guys about the possibility of changing one of our policies around first hour free in garages, because that is something that actually we lose a pretty decent amount of money on.
Jessica, do y'all have any questions about the methodologies and best practices before she dives into the actual recommendations? Because there's going to be a lot of additional detail.
Yeah, it's a lot of words. And you should have received a memo as well that kind of mirrors this presentation.
I have a logistics question.
Sure.
Let's say I wanted to prioritize one of the strategies over the other that were on that last slide. Surely there would be a cost to expanding metered parking, say to South Slope. There would be enforcement, metering. So when we see the recommendations, we'll see the cost associated.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. And as far as the peak demand, I'm wondering, I know when I go downtown, I purposefully go once there's free parking. So are we saying that one of the reasons there's demand is because there's free parking from 5 and later?
There's definitely potentially a little bit of a chicken and egg there, where because there's free parking, it could be inducing demand, but we also see that there are a lot of there's a lot of people parking there, so we could be missing an opportunity. So charging for parking might result in a little bit less demand, but we believe that on the balance, there's still a lot of opportunity there, not only for revenue generation, but to increase turnover so that we don't have people just parking there for 12 hours and just taking up those spaces. One of the reasons why you want to have turnover in on-street parking is so, generally businesses like that. It's kind of like if you're a restaurant over, you want to turn your tables over and see that business, you want to try and turn as many tables as you can. It's a similar thing for parking for business owners too. They want people to be able to have a convenient spot. So if someone's coming in and just parking in that parking space and never moving, and that parking space doesn't turn over, it just makes it more difficult for people to come visit that business.
And do we have a way of knowing, and I bet the answer is no, the parking habits of locals versus parking habits of visitors to our city?
We have seen that data from the Downtown
Yeah.
Association. I was just pulling it up, and I'll forward it to all council.
For the meters
It's helpful,
or for the?
the timing.
It was, I don't know that answer,
But I think
but it was showing
resulted-
that,
Oh, sorry, go
I
ahead.
think it was around downtown visitors. Let me see what downtown visitors, so it's a proxy, it's not based on ours, but it was showing,
What is
I do not have access to that data, but
Yeah.
I think
What's downtown visitors?
Association does.
that there's basically, I'm like presenting someone else's data, but.
Like, how can you tell if a downtown visitor is
The
a
way
local
that-
or a?
They do it by
Credit
credit
card data.
Credit card and
Okay.
by
Capturing
phone,
credit
so
card
like
data.
if your area code and then your credit cards, and so this is a method the Downtown Association uses for a lot of stuff, or we've also used with like McCormick Stadium when we were trying to understand how many visitors, locals, regional, so it's like those people who use that method. And this thing, and again, I'll forward it right now, it shows that we have more visitors in this evening peak than any other time, and less inbound commuters, i.e. locals, and less residents. So it's showing visitors go out to eat at dinner is my guess, so I'll forward this on so other folks can see,
I'm
because I was very
recalling,
curious about that too.
Hayden specifically said this was cell phone data, it wasn't credit card
Yeah,
use,
that's
which I
what I
thought was
recall as
interesting,
well.
because it was new data in a way I hadn't seen it. And I believe a conversation came from that has come up a little bit in our conversations around budget, but the idea that mostly locals are always here on Wednesday, but visitors are usually here on Sunday. Like, could there have been a shift in metering on Sundays to not meter on a day during the week? It was an idea that came from the community that I thought, made great logical sense and might see an increase in revenues. Implementation could also be very challenging, but
So are we saying, generally speaking, people who come downtown are more likely to be visitors to the area than local to the area?
I don't know.
It is going to be more trackable when we're using less cash, which society is doing. But I think that it's leading to why some of the businesses are saying protect the first hour free, because that seems to be where locals are coming downtown more. They've learned that pattern that they can run in and out of the shop, whereas 15 minutes doesn't cut it. And I'm hearing more support for expanding the meters.
Agreed. And West Asheville and Biltmore Village were also on that list of meter expansions for years. I'd
Yeah.
be curious
Do-
to just to,
As much as possible, want to encourage locals to utilize and support the culture and businesses downtown. I think, yes?
And also, I don't know if we've got this in this presentation, but and this, I'm just throwing this out here, but just how many permit holders are using the spaces versus non-permit holders and things like that. You know, like at my law firm, we buy our staff all parking passes in the, I think we're in the Harris deck, so the Civic Center deck. So you just kind of, you know, just understanding that balance.
Okay.
Okay, so we get the idea.
yeah, I appreciate overall this
of how it's
interest in
pricing.
tweaking things is what I'm seeing. I know we tweak things and
Right.
try to improve. Also, we're planning to maintain the 1.5 million from parking to transit transfer this year?
So for the last, I might need to ask Tony and Lindsay, but I believe for the last 2 years, maybe 3, it has only been 950.
Oh,
It might have
back to
been,
950.
yet last year it was
Okay.
0.
Right. So what are we
Yeah,
trying to do?
Helene year it was 0.
And what is it planned or
950, I
950,
believe.
okay.
Plus a fund balance transfer for the
Uh,
contract.
And then this year, yes, fund balance
Parking fund
transfer.
balance, yeah. Or a transit fund balance transfer.
Yeah, and we did budget it for 950 in the Helene year, but because of all the lost revenue in the parking fund that year, we didn't actually make the transfer, so it was 0 that year. But we have been budgeting 950 the last several years.
So I think I might have thrown off the presentation. Just wanted to give space for you all to ask any questions about the methodology. But she's going to deep dive into the recommendations, and you'll have an opportunity to ask more specific questions.
Okay, so our data shows that we have 2 daily peaks. We have a 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. peak and a 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. peak. Currently, our on-street meter spaces are free and unrestricted during that peak evening demand. And what happens is those spaces will fill up and basically stay filled. So that means there's limited turnover happening at those evening hours. Rankin and Wall Street garages have monthly permit waiting lists that exceed 2 years, and Biltmore's waiting list is more than a year. And so that is creating a lot of frustration for folks that have been waiting for a very long time to get on that wait list. So that's signaling to us we have an over demand. We have a lot of demand there. So looking at it from a pricing standpoint, we could raise those prices potentially. So this last bullet has to do with the first hour free. And just putting our parking hats on, we know that this is an economic development thing that we know a lot of downtown businesses do really, really like the first hour free. So this recommendation is just purely from our parking hat. Over 20% of our transactions are within this first hour free. So we're generating $0 from about 20% of our transactions. And we're actually losing money on that, not a significant amount, but because we're, printing tickets and there's wear and tear on the garage itself with vehicles using it, wearing traffic coatings off of the garages and things of that nature. So we just feel like, we should tell you there is a cost to that, so that you understand that. So what we have proposed, we've broken it down into what we just called low impact, medium impact, and high impact. And that's meant to be from a revenue perspective, but also the perspective of the user, like financially and otherwise. These ones that are the low impact ones really are very much, they're more administrative. And they're meant to be kind of fixing things that we see happen semi-often, including things that are illegal parking issues that we see people do pretty frequently that we just need to add to the fees manual so that we can actually charge them for that. And so they're very insignificant, and we do not foresee them bringing in very much money at all. So they have a zero associated revenue increase, but they will provide flexibility for us, especially L2, with being able to apply the special event rate to some of our parking lots. Occasionally we have overflow with big events, and so we want to be able to say and have to say it in our fees and charges manual that, okay, we want to open up lot whatever, 15 for overflow, and this just gives us the administrative authority to do that. So these ones are very straightforward. L4 is right now our fees and charges manual for monthly on-street permits. So we do have permits for folks that are on-street, and right now our fees and charges manual, and this is something we probably want to improve on next year, is it's listed by street. So the pricing structure is $30 to $50, and it's like Elm Street is $30 and Center Street is $40 or what have you. We want to have the ability to add new spaces on different streets throughout the year without having to come to have to do it through the fees changes process. We would just like to have the ability to add some new on-street spaces somewhere between the current $30 and $50 without having to come to council during the annual budget process to do that. So that's what L4 is about. Any questions about low impact changes before I move on to medium? Okay, so medium, these are relatively straightforward as well, except that they do have, I think, a little bit more of they have more of an impact on those that are permit holders, particularly at the garages, except for Harrah's. So this is trying to get back to the high demand that we have and the very high wait list that we have at Wall Street, Rankin, and Biltmore. So our proposal is to raise the rates there and by $20 and keep the Harrah's Cherokee garage monthly rate the same. And also, at the same time, increase the lot permit rate by $5. So those are kind of together on purpose. And so this one, although it's not a significant revenue generator for parking services, it is meant to be a demand shifter for us. It also kind of goes with us being able to add additional monthly on-street spaces, which is another opportunity for downtown workers. And so we really would like to be able to add more permit opportunities there to help offset increases associated with these. And then M2 is kind of a separate thing, just associated with special events. Any questions on this one? No? Okay. Okay, so this is the hard one. H is for high impact. So the first one, first hour free to first 15 minutes free. This doesn't really have a cost associated with it. This is essentially, we would change it to 15 minutes free. It would allow people who mistakenly get into the garage the ability to get out. It might be enough time for somebody to run in and get a coffee from somewhere potentially, but it really is, it would just be meant to be a grace period. And so this one is just for you guys to consider, and but it is a recommendation from us from a best practices standpoint. We also are recommending the H2A, which is to extend the parking meter hours by 2 hours to 8 p.m. This does have a cost associated with it, but it is a shared cost with the South Slope expansion. So we can talk about that and then talk about the costs associated with that if you'd like. So the South Slope expansion is not technically a fee change, it's a new request. It's something that has been part of our parking plan for a while. We were planning to start that this fiscal year, but with Helene, we postponed it. It's a new request more because it includes expenses. It does include, of course, the purchase of the meters themselves, which is a capital expense, but it also includes some ongoing personnel-related expenses. So there is about, we are anticipating about 498,000, so we can just call it 500,000 in revenue the first year from the South Slope expansion. But the first year expenses are expected to be almost the same, almost that much, about 463,000. But then after that, our ongoing expenses, we would expect to be about 166,000. So annually, our net revenue would be about 347,000. If we did
Wait, do that math again.
What?
That's not
Why
mathing.
are you showing us 498 then?
The first year has higher expenses. The second year, the expenses, the fixed expenses will reduce. So we'll net about 360,000, 350,000 in year two.
Right.
The
so
first
then-
year will net
That
like
makes
30.
sense. So where's 498 come from?
That's the first year revenue, but it has
Yeah.
first year expenses of 460 something.
And if you don't mind,
Yes, ma'am.
can you explain
Just
the
the
use of the
story that-
word alternative?
It's
So I
350
see 8.2A as a
Starting with two.
recommended alternative.
Mhm.
My question is, alternative to what?
So
H1? Is that what you're?
So see how, so H2A, H2B, and H2C, we meant to be alternatives to each other,
Okay.
where,
So of those three, you would recommend the first one, which is A.
correct.
They all have the same impact to staffing?
No. So, and these are just related to on-street meters. So the first one, we probably explained this more thoroughly in the memo, but right now, we enforce meters on Monday through Saturday from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And so the first one, the recommended one, what we're saying is we want to go 2 extra hours into the evening. So from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m.
Or
And
from
what
8
would-
a.m. to 8 p.m.
Correct, yes.
What
I'm
would
sorry,
we-
Yes,
And we would net 460,
correct.
including the additional labor to monitor. So we would net.
Oh, net, no. Shoot.
Okay.
Our revenue would be 460, and our first year operating costs would be 273, and our ongoing costs would be 151, so our net would be.
That helps.
We should have added a column for net, but our net would be
300 in future years.
310,000.
Yeah, we
Jessica,
probably
I-
need to see the net first year
For all
and
of
net
them.
2 in remaining years, so that we
Right.
know, the.
Net 2 is 300 and
Yeah.
beyond,
Yeah.
second year.
Do,
So that's interesting, because the discussion around metering enforcement has always been, we used to have a parking subcommittee. Kim and I were on it. We used to nerd out about this stuff. So it used to be that the enforcement was the challenge because people work shifts. So in this extend parking 6 to 8, you're actually still running 8 to 8, or are you running 10 to 8?
8 to 8 is on
8 to
one.
8. And then 10 to 8 is the, okay, I see, I'm sorry. But
so, we got this presentation a little bit late, so we haven't been able to I think it came in today. Not last night, anyway, I know I had.
I do think
So,
that,
because I was just gonna say, in these next slides, there's a whole bunch of information about the granular details on each proposal and how they net out and what they cost and so on and so forth. So we're kind of
yeah.
getting ahead on the presentation. Do we wanna kind of walk through, because I know we all have a lot of ideas about other things that we might be like to add or tweaks we like to these. Should we power through these and then?
I think so, but it would just ultimately help to have a follow-up that shows like the side-by-side comparison of net.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
We
absolutely.
can absolutely.
They're
do that.
just, it's just presented on each individual. Go for it, just.
Right. So, yeah, so I mean, essentially, what we're trying to do with the different alternatives of H2A, B, and C is to say, with A, we're saying extend the enforcement hours later into the evening by 2 hours. With B, we're saying just start them a little bit later in the morning at 10 a.m. and end them at 8 p.m. So you're not changing the total number of enforcement hours, but you're getting that peak evening instead of the morning when it's pretty dead in the morning.
I mean, from workers to visitors, that's lunch and dinner.
And then C is an alternative that could be considered, which is doing enforcement on Sundays, which we don't do now.
What time range on a Sunday?
Maybe go to the next slide.
It's not there.
To the, oh, thank you.
Oh, I don't have a slide on that.
Okay.
So we would do it,
Here's
we would
this
do
one.
the same hours.
Yeah,
There's
that's
one.
right, there's one.
There's one.
H2C, go back one.
There.
Right there.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
What does this mean for enforcement staffing? Wait.
So we would
2
have
new
to,
half-time, okay.
we would have additional staffing. But like I said, we'd have, if the South Slope were also approved, we have additional staffing that goes with that new request. So it'd be shared new staffing. So.
It's interesting, because the Sundays and the South Slope are the two that are catching my attention more than losing first hour in decks and going till 8 p.m.
Same.
You know,
And
but
I'll
I
say
wanna
those are the
also-
ones that are causing me the most personal consternation.
Are they?
Just, that's when I come downtown.
That's
Or
when you-
that's when I can convince friends to come downtown. So sometimes it's Sunday after church, or let's go to
Right.
brunch, or let's meet for dinner, but just on a personal level, where I'm more likely to go, let me go to chemist. I can just pull up right there and go in, and I suspect my behavior would alter if I had to pay for it.
There's also been a lot of local businesses that have opened their second locations in places that don't have as much of a parking problem. I know some neighbors will make the effort to drive to South Asheville to go to some of the local businesses' second locations.
When we were discussing social districts.
Yeah, that was a while back.
Okay.
Do you, I guess one of the things I'm curious about, so when I go to the South Slope, it's almost impossible to find on-street parking. And I suspect one of the reasons is because it's not metered and people can just leave their car there all day long.
Right.
So if I'm a business owner, I actually might like metering because it's gonna force some turnover in the parking availability.
Right.
Mostly, we just get emails from people complaining about the private lots and how much of a fine they got, and we don't have the ability to control it other than
Right.
regulate the signage. So I'd be interested to hear from the South Slope business owners about their, support or not, what their feelings are about this. But my sense is that it could actually be helpful in terms of the business.
We've asked,
What they're
they've been
experiencing.
asked. We could probably find that.
Yeah, well, right, I mean,
So
I hear what you're saying about like incentivizing locals to go visit downtown, and I don't really know, I mean, I'd like to see the data, I mean, we just saw.
Well, see, you wouldn't see any data because wouldn't be a meter.
Oh, no, yeah, I mean, I guess, however they,
Because if you don't pay, there's no data.
I mean, best,
The
yes.
data
There's
of who's
been-
visiting.
there have been study after
Data
study
of
after
who's
study
visiting
that
is
says that
It's important too.
turnover is created by meters.
Yeah.
then,
Parking
And the
pricing.
businesses have weighed in.
there are parking is an industry all unto itself. You can get like a degree in parking. I mean, because there's a whole science behind it and how you serve locals, how you serve visitors. So I don't pretend to know exactly, I don't know what strategies change which behaviors. I rely on the experts for that. So what I do know though is that our city, when I compare us to our sister cities, we're leaving a lot of money on the table that we're not getting through parking. And since we use parking revenue to underwrite transit, and transit is such a huge cost in our general fund, we've got to figure out a way to help bolster our transit funding and parking fees that we're not currently collecting are an excellent way.
This is a perfect segue because I can see your face, because she's saying, I was gonna bring up the same point, that increasing these fees would be for maintenance and into the more parking fund. And I kind of cringed at that because, I was gonna bring this up, that, here we are adopting fees potentially tonight around a transit contract that increases our budget $800,000. And if the parking fund was doing better and able to commit more to transit, we wouldn't be raising the taxpayers' bills. But we're not doing that. This takes time to implement, but I think it's an important piece during budget season to talk about. So when you say it's just for maintenance of parking facilities.
I don't really get how that maths, because we haven't had this money to begin with. So, and we use parking funds to underwrite transit. I get that we don't even have enough parking funds to do what we should be setting aside for annual maintenance. And also we're putting out $11 million in debt to fix 3 of our parking decks, which is just about complete, I think. And so we're gonna need to use these revenues coming in to support that debt service. But, we're only just touching what I think we've been interested in looking at for years. We haven't, unless it's later in this presentation, looked at Biltmore Village, Biltmore Park.
West
I mean, we
Asheville.
have
West Asheville.
West Asheville, we have other areas that if you go to other cities, they meter these places, and we just don't. Because we're like kind of on the cusp of, if you go to Franklin, North Carolina, or Sylvan, North Carolina, or Brevard, North Carolina, they don't meter these spaces in their little downtowns, because they have kind of their downtowns. But we're past that point. We have too many visitors that come here that we're not able to collect revenue from, because of all kinds of other reasons that, we need to be more creative about and getting funds from.
I want to add in a couple of thoughts too, since I'm kind of on the slide of the high impact options, which I understand you guys were able to really turn around a slew of very complex analysis very, very quickly. And there's still more detail that I look forward to having, but even if we're at the big picture, I just wanted to share some thoughts. I do think having meters encourages turnover, and that benefits storefronts and businesses, so I'm curious about that. I also do know if we did ask South Slope businesses right now, they're very, very, very anxious about the road work. That's gonna be 2 years.
a stormwater.
Yes, and so the timing is a question mark I have for that district. Why is this the only proposal we're being shown? Was that just an example? Or could we look at Haywood Road, Biltmore Park, and maybe a staggered, like Biltmore Village is still recovering from the storm, so
Yeah,
theoretically, or thematically, I'm very curious about adding more meters, and then I'd be a little more curious about the nuance of the economy of those different places and seeing if there's a phased approach.
I mean, I can talk about that now or whenever, but I mean,
Sure.
there's a purpose to why we're proposing South Slope first. They've been talked to about it before and in the past, and granted, it's been a while, but businesses have been asking for it because there's no turnover. People are just parking in a parking space, parking there all day, and they want to see that turnover. And it's a growing area of businesses and residential. So they need a combination of meters and permit spaces. And so that's what we would do an engagement process with the neighborhood, with that area. And, you know, it's not like we go out there and install everything tomorrow. We would go through a process with that area and figure out a good mix of permit spaces and meter spaces. We think that Biltmore Village is another likely area, but it's not, we can't do it now. It's just not ready. There's also no good alternatives for employee parking in Biltmore Village or Haywood Road right now. So that's a more difficult situation. If you think about South Slope, it's got transit options, it's got garages, it's got more walkable options. Like, you have to also think about what are the employees that work there, what are they gonna do? So it's a little bit more of a complicated space. So that's why South Slope is poised. It's also, we already work down here, so there are a lot of factors why South Slope is positioned. The other areas aren't quite there yet. Also, we have to do some ordinance changes to go outside of CBD. So there's a lot of reasons why we're not ready to go beyond the South Slope right now. And there's a lot more community engagement that would have to be done for those other areas. And South Slope is a lot more ready for so many reasons.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
I still have an appetite for seeing a long-range strategy, especially to the point that the mayor was bringing up. We're going to talk about transit later. Transit's a passion of mine. It's an essential service. It's something that I really believe we need more of, and we've been able to use parking to support that. And so if we have a long-range, significant revenue increasing opportunity with parking, yeah, I just have an appetite to seeing what phasing over time looks like. I still have some questions around South Slope. I'm nervous. They're very nervous about the stormwater project. That's going to be a very long time, and they're still feeling very crippled from Helene. And so I think timing's a really important part of the puzzle as well. And then I really do want to see the numbers because it is conceptual right now, and I'm trying to understand, like, what's our net here? Like, and I might be more interested on Sundays, but I don't know that that's a net figure, so I just would love to see some more of that dialed in too. And I think first hour free is something I would protect.
Okay.
Personally.
Same.
15 minutes stresses me out.
It's something.
So wait, you can't even
I don't think
get-
anyone's gonna do anything with it, so you might as well say zero.
Park to get somewhere and get back, no.
Half the time you can't get from the space you're in to the exit gate in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
It's just true, especially if you're in the Civic Center deck, you might hit a backup.
I have some concerns about getting rid of the first hour free. I know a lot of locals. I also have concerns about extending the time that we're charging. Folks are looking for ways to stay in the city and make things more affordable. And in a lot of ways, they're looking to us to ease some of those pressure points. And I would not support a South Slope expansion right now either.
Anything else?
The only random parking thought I've had around this that we haven't shared is, at what point do we need to start talking about more parking decks? I mean, are we at a point where these decks, there's 2-year waiting lists? And I'm not suggesting we talk about it right now or this budget cycle or anything, but, and maybe it's in this long-term plan, but it sounds like we have a shortage of available decks. And they can be cash cows.
Well, right now in South Slope, we have a 900 space deck that's privately owned and operated, so.
Yeah.
Is it full?
It's
You know,
getting
I don't
utilization.
know. I mean, hopefully
It does.
eventually there's a project that's built
It is.
around it and uses that deck. It is, yeah.
Gets
But
used
for
though.
now, it's not, for now, it seems like it's meeting, more than meeting the need apparently.
I would say we need to take care of what we have now.
Yeah. It reminds me, with some of these big projects coming online around, we're seeing them in the housing and this big application cycle for larger housing complexes. Like the Aloft was a parking partnership. So maybe, even if we were interested in putting it out there that we wanted some more partnerships, maybe we could create some.
Jessica, can I ask a question about
Oh,
2B,
sorry.
because I'm building my own net chart. 2B doesn't have additional expenses listed because we're just moving our current hours instead of from 8 to 6 to 10 to 8 because of the demand.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the comments.
All right, so we do have some homework. We'll get you all some additional information around net, organize a little better for your information. I think Jessica was able to kind of explain why we started where we are. Lots more work to go, but
That was a lot of work.
Great
though.
feedback.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Incredible amount of work.
Thanks to Sabrina as well. She did a lot of it.
thank you. That's it for the budget work session.
Okay, all right, well,
Give us 2 hours.
yeah.